you telling me that you have a way to defer the tax situation there? Is that what you're telling me?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And so the first one I was referring to is a 1031 exchange, which only applies to investment real estate. The second one I'm referring to is called a deferred sales trust.
A real eye opener to see that there are ways that people can use the regulatory framework, if properly structured, to invest 1031 exchange dollars in things that you would not think were like kind to what they exited from. So it was very impressive. I got to say, you are the first one I've seen pull this off, and I'm pretty hesitant to believe in a lot of these kinds of things. So it's a major feat for me to say, wow, this actually really worked, and it was really cool.
1031 is a way to shelter your income when you sell the thing. The DST is a way to avoid the 1031 and not have to suffer the time penalty.
Our career and during different tax periods, we've seen, these tax avoidance, tax minimization, offshore, all these different strategies undertaken to minimize or avoid taxes. And then I can tell you that, some of them are just not worth the trouble. And so I was skeptical. Admittedly, I was skeptical. I thought, oh yeah, here we go, another one of these, right? And then they say, no, it really is different, right? So look more closely. We looked more closely. We had, honestly, 2 years of conversations. 2 years. Now we were being due diligence at the same time that we were doing due diligence, but 2 years is a long time to be, sort of flirting with the idea of and getting to know the people and getting to really understand the transaction. Yeah, long story short, we got comfortable, although we are not tax attorneys, lawyers, or estate planning attorneys, that at least, from an investment perspective, that, it made sense to sell a highly appreciated asset, get liquid, hold that in this type of a deferred or installment sale type of instrument, and then just be in a position then to do the most important thing. I'm probably stealing your next question, which is time. They say, well, you can't make more time. You can. The deferred sales trust, in a way, allows you to lengthen the investment time horizon for those assets after getting liquid, but before having to feel the tax impact. And from an investment manager's perspective, time horizon is the most important element in investing.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Capital Gains Tax Solutions Masterclass. Hey, we believe most high net worth individuals and those who help them, they struggle with clarifying their capital gains tax deferral options, and not having a clear plan is the enemy. And using a proven tax deferral strategy such as the deferred sales trust is an amazing way for you to create and preserve more wealth, exit highly appreciated cryptocurrency, businesses, real estate, really on your timing, right? Having some freedoms that you would like to take advantage of, and we're breaking down some of those freedoms. I believe everyone needs a good, solid, coach and business team and plan and advisors to help you exit well. Because let's face it, if you've built a business or real estate, or you've invested well with cryptocurrency, you may be an expert in that, but you may not be an expert in how to exit well, especially when it comes to highly appreciated assets that have a lot of taxes. And so you want to build a plan, you want to build a team. And so there's three things we're really focusing on: is helping you to envision what you're trying to achieve, helping you to build that dream team, and then unlocking the freedom through the outcome of what those two things combine, and the outcome of the deferred sales trust can combine. So we're excited to have you here, either for the first time or as a repeat attendee. We kind of do three different things here. We kind of talk about the vision of why we're here, and then we talk about some deal stories or some live deals that have closed or deals that are happening right now. Maybe some objections we came along this week, and maybe some new things that we've learned that we want to share with everybody. And then we'll open up for questions. And if you have questions along the way, you're happy to put that in the chat. And if you have a live deal you want to run by, or a scenario, we can also talk about that. I am joined by some amazing people, including one of our top strategic alliances and financial advisors across the country. He's amazing. He's a certified financial planner. His name is Jake Miller. Jake, how are you doing today, sir?
Doing very well, Brett. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to be here. And of course, we've got some new faces here in the group. Happy to hear what questions might come out of today's session.
Yeah, excited. And so let's dive right in. So Jake, you want to share a little bit about the vision for why we're here, and then we'll open it up for some deal stories.
Absolutely. We are all here today because there might be the sale of a highly appreciated asset. Typically, when there's a sale of something that has appreciated or grown over time, we have to pay a large amount of taxes because that's what we do. We grow our wealth, we pay our taxes, we grow it again, we pay our taxes, we grow it again, and we just keep reinvesting. That's the entrepreneurial American spirit, right? However, there is a better way. And that's the good news. This is the reason we're all here today. With the deferred sales trust, you can sell that highly appreciated asset without recognizing the taxes now. You can roll it over into another investment with the deferred sales trust and reinvest with the gross proceeds rather than net of taxes. So that's why we're here.
Perfect. Yeah. And as a part of that, people might be wondering, well, what are the numbers? Well, it's typically about 25 to 50% of your gain is going to be wiped out by capital gains tax and depreciation recapture. Now, this depends, of course, on what state you live in, and of course, how much depreciation you may have taken from an asset. You might own a primary home and it's not depreciable. You might own an investment real estate and you've been depreciating it. You may have done some cost segregation or accelerated depreciation. You might own public or private stock, which is not depreciable, or crypto, which is not depreciable. So then it could be a little more fixed. But still, you have a large gain, and you're going to have a huge tax potentially, depending on what state you're in. Some of the more favorable states are like a Florida or a Texas. They don't have any state capital gains tax, but then you're still going to have federal of about 20, and then probably and likely Obamacare of about 3.8. And then, of course, places like a California or New York, you have some like state income tax, which gets added on, which, for example, California is about 13.3. So the first thing you really want to do is define what problem you have. And I'm coming out with a book here, and actually Jake Miller is going to be in the book. And as a part of the book, I'm writing a new chapter. We're finalizing it now. And basically the government has spent about $31 trillion, right? And we're on the hook for that as taxpayers, and the government is, as they continue to increase taxes and try to figure out ways to pay for this. And so because the government has a spending problem, that means us as the U.S. citizens have a tax problem. And even if you're not a U.S. citizen, if you own real estate or investments in the United States that are subject to capital gains tax, we more than ever need a tax flow plan, right? It's not just about cash flow, it's about tax flow. And so that's what we're going to be talking about here, ways to do that and ways to help you hopefully unlock what you're trying to do, which could be some location freedom, some time and energy freedom, some retirement freedom, some entrepreneurial freedom, maybe some just diversification freedom, right? You want to sell something high that is appreciated, and you want to diversify that and get some cash flow, and whatever it might be, we want to try to unlock that for you, share some cool ideas and explore those, and really become like a mastermind here so that everyone can glean from one another and different ideas. That being said, Jake, which deal would you like to dive into today, or even a live deal that we're working on that might be, you think everyone here could benefit from? And I have a couple in mind too, but I'm wondering if you have anything in mind.
Absolutely. So we're going to be revisiting here. It's February now. So just now into February, we have a chiropractor. We have an individual with a business that is going to sell out to his brother and then move on to bigger and better things. And of course, state taxes, federal capital gains tax rate, possibility of this Medicare tax, that would be a substantial chunk, close to 30% of what he'd be bringing home, he'd have to send back to the government. Whereas if he collects that into the deferred sales trust, he, one, can reinvest it how he wishes. He can buy that piece of a medical equipment or whatever that's going to produce a lot of revenue for future ventures. He can go buy that piece of equipment with his deferred sales trust and incorporate that in a joint venture in a new business after the sale of his business. He can go buy some multifamily. He can go buy some alternative investments in other countries. He can do a lot of different things now because he has the freedom to choose. One, because he has more assets than he thought he'd end up with from the sale. Two, because he is able to do it in such a way that he doesn't have to pay the taxes now. We are deferring the sales transaction. I mean, the sale is occurring, but he doesn't have to recognize it for tax purposes. And that is literally what is providing him with all of these other freedoms that, Brett, you're about to tell everybody about, because we always talk about the freedoms that We lose if we just do things the traditional way.
Yeah, you nailed it. And that's really well said. And I think also too, part of this particular deal for this chiropractor, this isn't his first rodeo. In fact, this is his second successful business venture in the chiropractic space. And unfortunately, he didn't know us and we didn't know him. And we weren't in front of him and in front of the sale on the first one. And he had a substantial, painful tax exit. And he ended up starting it from scratch. And so he said, wait, Brett and Jake, as we were talking, this is a few months back, he said, so you're saying I could have sold my other practice, not only deferred the capital gains tax on that one, but that could have been the seed capital for my next chiropractic practice. He said, yes. And he goes, man, that's incredible. And he goes, I also bought a huge piece of equipment and a very expensive piece of equipment that I had to finance, or however he bought that. I forgot exactly, but he's saying, so I could have used the tax deferred money to partner with me to buy that piece of equipment? And the answer is yes. And these are the things that really comes down to some of the biggest objections we have, which is one, Jake, besides legality, it seemed too good to be true, can be like the expense of the trust. And so the question becomes, well, how do we make the deferred sales trust seems too expensive? You know, it's about 1.5 to 2% recurring fees, about 1.5 upfront one-time fee. And people go, wow, it seems too expensive. And the question, rather than saying it seems too expensive, is really how do you unlock the DST to become an investment rather than an expense? And that's where we get creative, and that's where our team comes into play. And so as we unlocked it for him and said, well, what are you looking to do post-close? And he says, well, I'm probably going to start another business venture. And Jake, you smartly said, well, tell us about that business venture. What does that look like? And he said, well, there's a big piece of equipment that I'm going to buy, and it's going to cost, north of $1 million. And it's going to produce some good revenue, but it's going to take some time to build up the practice. And he said, well, what would it mean to you if you could use the funds in the trust that you've deferred to help, purchase or be with you in that business? He said, that would mean I have to go borrow with interest rates that have doubled now in the past, 8 months at a high interest rate. So all of a sudden, Jake, what happened? We moved from it just being an expense to pay using your expertise to what? Make it an investment.
Exactly. And instead of paying somebody else high interest, he gets to pay himself into the trust. And so it becomes either an asset, or he can obviously lend something out to this joint venture and then charge himself interest, be the earner of the interest because he has extra money, because he didn't have to chop up his assets of the sale to pay taxes with.
Yeah. And so let's walk through that really slowly, because Jake and I, we sometimes can talk fast. And so we want to make sure you get this, because honestly, this is for me, the foundational value add transformation that the trust provides is the ability to partner with the trust to purchase real estate, now it needs to be investment real estate, to start a business venture. Where we call this the idea is lendership. Okay. At first, you're a lender to the trust, and you can always be passive. And we have clients that are, hey, I'm just ready to retire and I'm not looking to be an entrepreneur or own more property myself. I actually just would prefer to be passive. And can we just go into the biggest companies in the world, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, dividend paying stocks, a mutual fund allocation. And then Jake Mueller can provide all of that. But there are some that are like chiropractors, business owners that are, still looking to start that next business venture. And so a part of the funds can go with him in that next deal. And the way we do that is by forming, or the client in this scenario would form a brand new LLC. And that LLC would be structured in a joint venture partner. And the joint venture partner in this scenario would be the trust that owes him the money. So I'll give you a deal that closed a couple of years back. And this particular client, his name is Shay, and he sold a business. Actually, his partners bought him out of the existing business, and about $2.5 million hits the trust. He defers about $600,000 of tax. But his next business venture was being a multifamily developer. And he used a portion of the funds to partner with him and another partner, all tax deferred, to help build 70 units in Tennessee. And so at first he was just a lender to the trust, and then he became an owner of an LLC, and the trust that owes him the money put the money into the LLC. and he didn't put any money into this LLC, and he also could have put it, but most of the time the trust puts all the money, but he gets the majority ownership of that LLC, and that's the cool part. Now that LLC makes a profit, he pays back the trust, which pays him, and that additional upside, he's able to capture that. So he's not just fixed at typically what's like an 8% return net of fees over a 10-year period of time. Jake, would you like to slow that down even more, or perhaps expand on anything I just said there?
The magic here is that now there's a lot of options that are open. Mechanically, as you mentioned from the very beginning, they have ownership of this asset. We move it into the trust. We get a promissory note that stays in the name of the individual or the family or whatever, right? Now that the asset's in the trust, it's being sold. And I'm just saying the same things you said, but in my words, right? Assets being sold, but the trust receives the money, not you. Because the trust receiving it and you're not receiving it, you don't have to pay taxes right now. Trust is receiving the proceeds of the sale of the asset. The trust is receiving money. Now you can take that money, reinvest in the business. Now you can take that money, reinvest in other investments. You can invest in real estate. You can invest in marketable securities. You can invest in a lot of different things. Now is a great time to diversify. With everything changing, with the stock market, with the real estate market, with businesses in general, with economies in other countries, now is a great time to look at your overall future growth objectives, your income objectives, your investment objectives, and analyze it all with fresh eyes. What is it that you really should be invested in right now? And if you have a chance to get out of something that's not aligned with your investments, and you're afraid to do so because of the taxes, the deferred sales trust could be a solution to help you diversify without having to pay those taxes right now.
Yeah, very, very well said. And so that's a little bit of the how. We got into a little bit of the nuts and bolts there, but I think it's really important to understand that. And so let's talk a little bit more about the what and the why. So some of the what has to do with what do you want, right? And that's honestly the most important thing. Sometimes it's figuring out what you don't want. I'm speaking with a new potential DST client, and he's considering just holding on to his properties and doing some gifting to his children slowly over time, and then getting what's called the stepped up basis, and they can walk away capital gains tax free, which is a great way if you own investment real estate or other assets too that you don't mind not selling right now. But I actually asked him, but what were some of your motivations to potentially sell? He's like, well, I actually don't really want to be property manager anymore. Like, I'm kind of tired of it. I've been doing it for 30 years, and he's built up millions and millions of dollars of real estate. And he goes, I don't really like the rent control in California. I don't like insurance costs, doubling with the floods and the fires. And he goes, insurance went from $12,000 to $35,000. Honestly, I don't really want to own any more real estate. I'm ready to kind of maybe buy a place on the beach and retire more. And I said, okay, well, think about that, right? That's what you do want, right? And you also know what you don't want. And so part of it is just clarifying where you're at right now, and then also clarifying where you want to be. And the next step is just saying, well, what are our options? And you might do a 1031 exchange. You might do a cost segregation study on a deal that you already own and get some accelerated depreciation. You might say, I really like to give it away to charity. Okay, cool. You can do a charitable remainder trust. You can also do a donor advised fund. You might say, I like that opportunity zone deals, the opportunities there to kind of grow. I don't mind being passive for a while, a long time, actually about 10 years, and get some capital gains tax free on some of that growth. So clarifying what you do want is really important, but also clarifying what you don't want is equally important to give clarity on that. And then it's just really figuring out what you're going to do, right? Because now you want to narrow it down to which strategy, which team is going to help you to get where you want to be. We have found, generally speaking, the deferred sales trust, given times like this, because if you want to be out of debt, which comes into some of the freedoms, if you want debt freedom, the deferred sales trust allows you to do that, versus something like a 1031 exchange where you have to do equal or greater value, which means equal or greater debt, which is not great right now. If you want diversification freedom, the deferred sales trust gives you that, whereas in a 1031, you have to move it all into the same asset class, which is investment real estate. If you want estate tax freedom, Jake and I are working on some large deals where we're going to eliminate some of the estate tax using what's called the DST plus, without having to give it all away to charity, without having to, gift it away to your kids. If you want location and time and entrepreneur freedom, we've kind of talked a little bit about that. But some of our clients are approaching us with high-end primary homes, and they want to move out of California or New York or whatever state they might be in and relocate to another state, and they have huge capital gains tax on that primary home. So really defining what you do want and what you don't want is so important. And then figuring out which strategy is going to best fit how to solve that. So that being said, Jake, what other deals, might be beneficial to talk about right now, or any thoughts on anything I just said?
Just in regards to what you just said, Brett, right now, the political climate, we talked about the couple big deals that we have going on, right? And the estate taxes. But help everyone here know and understand what's going to happen at the end of 2025, the beginning of 2026. Why is it so critical that we're looking at some of these numbers right now? And why are some of these people deciding to sell now rather than hold on to it later?
It's a great question. And so back to the 21 or the 31 trillion, that's a key number of debt and the US debt. I also want to give you another 32 trillion is the estimate for the baby boomer generation, which is known as the largest wealth transfer in the history of the planet, is happening in the next 20 years. And that is a lot of, Jake and I say parents, maybe you are a baby boomer. And it's tied to really three main assets that are illiquid: high-end primary homes, commercial real estate, and private equity or businesses. And these are all illiquid assets that are highly appreciated and probably take up a lot of time, energy, and some stress. So what happens? A lot of people want to sell these when it makes sense for them, especially with the marketplace shifting. And I mean, maybe we've already shifted, and real estate it seems like it's coming here. So the question is, will they be taxed, not only capital gains tax, but actually their total net worth will be subject to estate tax? So the stats are this: if you're married right now and you're worth basically less than 24 million as a married couple, you have what's called an exemption. So anything below that number is not subject to what's called 40% death tax. And this has nothing to do with the stepped up basis. This has nothing to do with capital gains tax. It's actually the big elephant in the room, which is estate tax. If you're single, you have about 12 million or so. Now in 2025, those are set to go back to what they were before, which is about half and potentially less. That means 12 million now becomes the big number if you're married, and about 6 million if you're single. So the question is, how much of that's going to be inside or outside of your taxable estate, which means if it's above that number and it's still inside your taxable estate, it's subject to a 40% death tax. So that's the key. That's a critical thing to really analyze right now. Jake, anyone add anything to that? Or
Well, and that's exactly where I needed and wanted you to go. Also, at the end of 2025 and the beginning of 2026, there is the reset where things go back to they were before as a default in the actual tax rates for capital gains because of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, sunset, or the 10-year window that goes away, so to speak. That's going to reset, and your exemptions get cut in half. We're discussing with an individual right now who has a $10 million portfolio, $10 million portfolio in stocks, bonds, mutual funds, everything else. And single widow, she doesn't, her husband passed away years and years and years and years ago. So there's not really a whole lot of benefit from when he was alive and in offsetting with a basis and things of that nature of the portfolio. So they're looking at, hey, if my exemption, which is $12 million right now, if she keeps living another 10 years, well, in a couple of years, that exemption is going to go down to 6. And so 4 million of that portfolio could be subject to the death tax at 40%, in addition to the capital gains tax, which could be rather critical for the passing on of this asset to their heirs.
So this is really critical, right? So what Jake is saying, even if you're on the edge of either 24 or 12, you have to understand that it's not just so simple to just get it outside your taxable estate. So we have a solution called the Deferred Sales Trust Plus, which means upon the sale, it has to take it needs a sale. It needs to be a third-party buyer buying it for fair market value. Upon the sale, we can move it into this deferred sales trust plus with the DST 2.0. And this eliminates the estate tax by the way the deal is structured with the tax attorneys. There's no limit to the size. There's no interest charge above 10 million. But to a lot of people's point, like they don't necessarily maybe think they have an estate tax problem, but realize that that 12 million, if she's married, and she lives another 20 years, could easily double or triple. And if she sells now at the right time, right, at a higher point when she actually wants to sell, we're going to just completely eliminate that 10 million from her taxable estate. But that growth of that 10 million inside of the deferred sales trust is also outside the taxable estate. So let's say that goes to 20 or 30 million. Now her children are the beneficiaries. What an incredible way to keep the wealth in the family. So it's not just the sale, it is the timing of all of this. It's like you're in the fourth quarter, there's 10 seconds to go. You've built your wealth to 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, $100 million, $1 billion. And you're saying, Brett, I'm about to sell my property, my business, this stock, this cryptocurrency. And what we're saying is in one day, in one transaction with the DST Plus, we are going to generationally change that 40% death tax for not only that exit of that amount, but all of the growth of that, which is tremendous, right? So it comes next to which was the crisis of where the tax is going to be. This money in the next 20 years, to kind of bring this full circle, is either going to be in the wealth in the hands of those who created it and their families, or it's going to be, a lot of it's going to be taxed and it's going to be with the government. And I think we could all agree, Jake, that no matter how and where, who's in office, they waste this stuff away pretty quick, right? And they don't seem to be great spenders. They don't seem to really ever, live up to a lot of their promises, and they don't have a lot of transparency. So that's part of what we believe in our values, is that wealth is better in the hands of the people because they can hold people accountable and their families. And if they want to give. Those are just some of my thoughts. Maybe that's a little too political. What do you think, Jake?
No, I think it's fantastic and great. And what we're trying to help people not do is lose control of their assets. And technically, when you have to pay taxes prematurely, you are losing control of a big portion of your assets, specifically if you have to pay capital gains tax and estate taxes. Talking 20%, another 40%. What have we really got left over after all of that? So the longer that you can hold on to that money and invest it and reinvest it and move it out of your estate and grow it, the more good you can do for those who are nearest to you, which is your family.
There it is. Great. I also want to bring in Pierce and Jake Carpenter. Pierce is a luxury real estate agent down in Newport and a commercial agent as well, Newport Beach area. He helps to co-host the podcast as well. Pierce, how are we doing this week?
We're doing awesome. How are you?
Doing well. What questions or thoughts would you like to add to the everyone today?
Yeah, so I was having a conversation with a guy who owns millions and millions of square feet of industrial space in LA. And his philosophy was, we were having this conversation about the DST, and his philosophy was, well, I really just want my kids to have this real estate and it to be an annuity as like part of the estate plan. And I said, okay, like that's awesome. And he's like, yeah, they'll just kind of like pay the tax, and then, the annuities will kind of just do that from the cash flow from the properties. What's I've started to come up against is a lot of people think that they have like a really good estate plan, but it seems like there's a lot of can you just kind of speak to like how difficult it is to get assets outside the taxable estate? Because we basically come here and we say, hey, look, like in one transaction we can get out. So like in my mind, that's like, oh yeah, it's like pretty easy to do. But like I think sometimes I kind of gloss over like what that actually means.
That was going to be my comment, was the fact that if you're not familiar with the process that most people have to go through to remove assets outside of the estate, it takes years, sometimes 20 or 30 years, or the purchase of very, very expensive life insurance to create additional liquidity to pay those taxes. So that Pierce is right on the money, because if you in one transaction can remove a significant portion of the estate without some very expensive life insurance purchases that disrupt cash flow, that wreck your balance sheet, that intrude in the cash flows of the businesses and the estate of the families, or a complicated giving strategy where you're giving to, this is very, very, it is a game changer to be able to remove potentially hundreds of millions of dollars outside of your taxable estate that are subject to federal estate tax and potentially state estate tax, while also addressing capital gains tax.
You nailed it, Jake Carpenter. Jake Miller, do you want to add to that? Because I think this is really important to help people understand it's not as easy as you think, unless you want to give it all the way to charity. You want to buy huge life insurance policies, or you have like 50 kids where you can gift more each kid, right? So walk through some of the general ways that I would call them maybe more blockbuster ways versus Netflix.
Well, and I'll just say that there's a lot of advice out there that is somewhat limited. Advice from really good people, well-intentioned professionals. But Brett, expounding on what you mentioned, sometimes it's a little bit out of proportion. They're trying to solve something with a product that's meant to be a piece of the solution, not the whole solution. So not saying that you shouldn't buy the life insurance, not saying that you shouldn't be charitable, but giving everything away doesn't need to be what you have to do to solve the solution. Because at the end of the day, most of us still have a legacy that we want to leave. And it's not all to the charity. It's not all to the museum. It's not all to the nonprofit. And it's not all life insurance to pay for the death tax, right? These are all pieces that should fit together. And I tell a lot of people that the deferred sales trust, oftentimes based on your circumstance, can be a capstone piece central to several other strategies, but critical to allowing all these other strategies to find their proper place. Now, something a little bit more specific. A lot of times people do gifting. They gift, 15, 16,000 per, husband, wife, to each child, grandchild, etc., in a gifting strategy to try to get assets out of an estate. That's a very small amount when we were talking about people that have large estates. But that's one method that gets implemented. CRATs and CRUTs and dynasty trusts and asset protection trusts all have their place. And so does the deferred sales trust if one of your assets is a highly appreciated asset. And what we try to do is we sit down with your existing professionals and you at the dinner table or at the boardroom table, and we discuss all of these strategies and how to align them in a more efficient or a more effective manner for you. Because again, at the end of the day, I'm not saying that any of these other people are bad or poorly intentioned, but maybe they don't have all the information. Maybe they're not helping people who are selling highly appreciated assets every single day like we are. And so what I guess my message is that we work really well with other professionals. We sit down and we can speak face to face with your estate planning attorney, with your tax attorney, with your business legal counsel, with your spouse, with your aunt and uncle and cousin Bill, who's really smart, right? We can sit down with all of these people and we can help answer all of the questions so that all of your counselors and advisors can get on the same page with you. And
I love that, Jake, because your background and you were the head, I forgot exactly what it was called again, but essentially helping CPAs sort through over 400 plus CPAs and firms, sort through the top, maybe thousands of CPAs, sort through the top 400 strategies. They would bring you the best of the best, or try to, and your part of your role was to decipher what was worth exploring in detail and poke holes and find it. And they trusted you to help them with that. And now you have this breadth and depth of knowledge and the approach of let's put the options on the table and let's find out what's the best fit. I want to add to what Pierce was saying as well, is you want to make sure that you're speaking the same language. Because if this guy owns millions of square feet of industrial property, right, that makes me think he's worth 500 million to $1 billion. And we want to just clarify, okay, I see what you're saying. Your kids get a stepped up basis, and perhaps you're doing some gifting over the years. Are you saying that 100% of your assets are not going to be subject to estate tax? And if the answer is, yeah, it's not going to be subject to estate tax. Okay, well, then he doesn't have an estate tax problem. But most people we meet, and the way I would put it, I say most of the folks that are to your net worth, they can't get it out fast enough. B, don't want to give it all away to charity. C, don't want to buy expensive life insurance. And so if any of these things are resonating with you, would you be open to sitting down and seeing an alternative? Because if your goal is to keep the real estate, right, without having to sell it and let your kids just live off it like an annuity, the idea of Yellowstone comes into play, right? Like, how are you actually mathematically going to do that? Because if 40% is subject to death tax, are you going to refinance? What happens if the values aren't up at that point? What happens if interest rates are doubled at that point? What happens if it's just not a great time to sell? Like, what if you could sell it high now, move funds outside of your taxable estate? And by the way, go back and buy more real estate, go buy more industrial properties.
I like what Jake Miller had to say about that, because a lot of times if you're a large enough estate, you're already gifting, you're already charitably inclined, you've already bought the life insurance, and you're still over.
Right.
So like Jake Miller was saying, it can be a capstone to wrap everything up and create the maximum amount of efficiency and coordination, not just on the capital gains deferral side, but on the estate planning, estate tax side.
100%, Jay Carpenter. That's exactly right. So Pierce, I'm gonna let you come back in here, or I'm gonna encourage you to come back in, because I want to make sure we're getting into what he was really objecting to, and if you have any more context for us.
Yeah, what I'm not versed in is all of the strategies and stuff on the estate planning side of things to understand, okay, like I said, and one of the things maybe we could dive into a little bit more, either on or off, air, is what are those strategies? I mean, you guys mentioned life insurance, gifting, and, basically charity. Are those the only strategies? Because we talk to these really high net worth people, right? And they have a team, right? And this is an objection we get all the time, right? Like, at least, I do, with being 32-year-old punk out here in Newport Beach, like telling these $100 million guys or whatever, hey man, I got something that, your people might not know about. It's a very delicate way to say that, right? But like, are there other ways of doing it? I mean, there's thousands of trusts out there that do different things, and all these strategies and so on and so forth. It's hard to imagine that the super high net worth people haven't, like, quote, figured it out. But it, call after call after call, we talk about this is a challenge, a serious challenge. And I just think that I've kind of been, privy to the light, if you will. Like, and to me, it just didn't seem like that big of a deal. And maybe I don't understand the magnitude of what that means. And I just kind of thought, if I don't understand it, and I've been learning about this thing for 8 years, like, do other people understand it?
Yeah. So Pierce, it sounds like the person, who you're talking with. And by the way, you're 32, I'm 39. I get the same thing too. Like, I'm trying to get the more gray on the sides, right? So maybe people take me even a little more seriously. But I think part of it is instead of overcoming with logic and evidence, which we have all of that in the track record and the deals and all that, it's telling a better story, right? And so Pierce, what's the one story that we tend to tell that helps people to really maybe move from what they might be missing? Do you remember that one?
There's a bunch of different really awesome stories. So, are you talking about Minnesota Vikings guy? Are you talking about the $120 million deal in
how about the David
San
Young?
Diego? Are you talking
about the David Young?
David Young's a great one.
Yeah.
Or Calvin, he's another good one.
Yeah.
David Young is what with Bill Gross when they went from 800 billion to 1.2 trillion with PIMCO.
80 billion to 1.2 trillion. Right. And so sometimes it's telling that
80
better
billion.
story. And
Yeah.
it's explaining that even some of the best in the world are still learning something new. And part of the way that our team works is 100% conditional. And this is actually very, very rare that tax attorneys that are as smart and as sophisticated and as accomplished that will take calls and go through everything, A to Z, answer all the questions and charge nothing on our side unless you use the deal. That's how confident we are in the way that we work. And so, I would say keep building the relationship, right?
Sure.
And keep telling some deal stories, keep sending the sales comps, right? And then just, invite that person to come to a conference, right? To come to a live event, because sometimes taking that first call, especially for these guys, they're not going to want to get on the call if they're the billionaires. They probably have a lot of people around them. And the approach might be, why don't you work and talk with their CPA? Why don't you talk with maybe even their tax attorney, right? And just say, hey, I get it. You may not be ready to meet, but would your guys be open to talking with us? And sometimes that's the approach, because they get so big and so wealthy that they are dependent upon their team, right? This is part of how they've been able to build their wealth. So it's not necessarily replacing him, but it's more coming alongside their entire team. Jake Miller, you want to add anything to that?
I would just jump in and say that sometimes we have to look at how things are proportioned. So how much of each strategy makes the most sense based on the objectives. They might be charitably oriented, but I'm giving 100% of my assets charitably oriented, or I'm going to give 10% of my assets to charity oriented, right? So proportion. And then based on all these risks, so Pierce, you talked about all these other things that might be out there. What are these other things? Each of these other things comes with a degree and level of risk. It is rare that any one strategy is always correct 100% of the time. And so based on the individual circumstance, what is the risk if they don't do the deferred sales trust? What is the risk if they do something else? And I say that because Brett commented about me being the back office for this association of CPA firm owners, where we had to answer questions and provide them with source documents and provide them with guidance and recommendations on what to encourage their clients to do. And oftentimes it was along the lines of, hey, in these circumstances, this strategy works. In these other circumstances, these same strategies fail. However, with the deferred sales trust, it has never been disallowed. So that's kind of like a big deal in the industry to have any strategy that has never failed or been disallowed. So with regards to a lot of these other strategies that they might do in lieu of the deferred sales trust that may accomplish something similar, it is quite possible they're taking on more risk simply because there are scenarios that those other strategies do fail. Whereas historically, the last 26 years, the deferred sales trust has never failed. So that's something to keep as a feather or in your hat or a quiver in your, for your bow, whatever, right? So proportioning how much money into what strategy, what is the risk that you're taking on? And then are we really accomplishing the objective of the client? Sometimes we have to go back to the whiteboard because we've gone so far in one lane trying to make a square peg fit in a round hole that sometimes we've left what truly was the client's objective. And a lot of times we need to get all the advisors of a client back on the same page and take 5 steps backwards and look again, what is it the client truly wishes to have accomplished? And if they just want to give a physical, tangible asset like a house to their kids that they keep the house, well, the deferred sales trust doesn't do that. But if the kids don't want the house and they just want the money and they want it split evenly or whatever, however they want it, well, maybe it makes sense to sell the house now and get it out of the estate. It depends on a number of different factors, right? So let's always be cognizant of what the client's true goals are. And again, if their goals are to reinvest, that's kind of like a big winner for the deferred sales trust. If their goals are to take the proceeds from the sale of a capital asset and continually reinvest and grow and diversify and put to work for them, deferred sales trust oftentimes comes out as a significant player in the strategy for the client.
So good, Pierce. You like that one? Good job, Jake. That was amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and remember, he can also buy back real estate. So if he's really, because sometimes, especially guys that have built that kind of net worth with multifamily properties or industrial or retail, that is their comfort zone. So say, that's great. Why don't we go buy back real estate? What if you could buy back your own deal in a couple of years from the guy who's overpaying for it right now? That actually happened. Let me tell you a story. It's a guy in Minnesota, $20 million deal. Okay. So make sure he knows that, oh, I didn't know you could do that. Yeah. So if you're really, really focused on investment real estate, and especially industrial, what would it mean if you had a new depreciation schedule on those deals? How would that increase your cash flow, right? And how, because you have offset for taxes. So I have some unique ideas, and I would love the opportunity to introduce you to a couple people. And that's the other thing too, you know, the goal would be to make an introduction and jump on a 30-minute call with Jake or I to go through, or both of us, to go through it and just see. So hopefully that helps, Pierce, and that's encouraging.
Yeah, super encouraging. I mean, it was a good conversation. I invited the dude to come on the podcast, be a guest, like talk about giving, like all stuff, you know?
Yep.
It was interesting the way that he framed it. Like I said, it's just, what I don't understand is how hard it is to move assets outside the taxable estate, because I'm just used to the DST and it's super easy.
So I think that's a good point. Maybe you should track down some estate planning attorneys.
Yeah.
Right? Some CPAs, some tax attorneys, invite them to be on the podcast and ask that question. How hard is it to move things outside the taxable estate? If you interview 5 or 10 of those and you spend 30 minutes each, you're going to be 90% ahead of probably where you were today. So that's a cool way to do that. And if you think about it, people want to, and we will, by the way, if they have a great idea, sweet. That's going to help someone else out. Like, that's why we're also called Capital Gains Tax Solutions. And Jake is called Strategic Tax Solutions with an S, right? It's plural. It's not Capital Gains Tax Solution, like one single thing, right? It could be a number of things. So that being said, I want to open it up for everybody else. Good job, Pierce. Good job, Jake and Jake. So what questions? We have one right now. You can unmute yourself. And looks like we have one here from Marty. Will this episode be available on YouTube channel? And if so, when? The answer is yes. And the answer is now. In fact, we're live streaming, if folks didn't know about that, to the Capital Gains Tax Solutions YouTube channel. We're also live streaming to the Expert CRE Secrets YouTube channel. I think Twitter as well, and maybe Facebook. So we do that every time. So we live stream. If you want to interact and be with us, you do need to register for this by going to capitalgainstaxsolutions.com, or you can be a part of this discussion, this masterclass. Now, the second part of that question from Marty is, could you confirm the fee structure as follows? Startup fee, annual fee, estimated ROI for the trust. Jake Miller, would you like to Jake Carpenter? Let's get Jake Carpenter back into this bad boy. Jake Carpenter, do you want to confirm the first part of the fee schedule? We'll do a round robin here, so we're not hearing the same people talk all the time. Jake Carpenter, what does the tax attorneys charge on the one-time fee? And then we'll let Jake Miller do the rest.
Yeah, so the first $1 million is 1.5%. And on everything additional to that's 1.25% and a one-time fee, which also covers lifetime audit defense.
Perfect answer. Jake Miller, what are the ongoing annual fees, generally speaking?
Yeah, generally, so trustee, financial advisor, and typically more of like corporate asset management, advisement of what to do with your assets altogether. So that's kind of a description. The fees are 2% or less. So Brett, typical estate management, oftentimes you're looking at 2 to 4%, one person. Here they're getting 2 people for 2% or less.
Exactly. Well said. And of course, if the value of the assets are higher, the asset goes a little bit lower. So we do have that. And typically what we're trying to do as far as the ROI is concerned is to net of those recurring fees, typically net you about 5, 6, 7, or 8%, depending on your risk tolerance. So let's say your risk tolerance scored at about an 8%. Our goal is to earn typically about 10% to net about 8 for you. That's if you're 100% passive. Now, what if you become active? Well, if you partner with the trust, back to the first part of this discussion, and that particular amount goes, above and beyond that, guess what? After you pay back the trust that owes you the money, you can get up to 80 or 98% of the upside, depending if you purchase an option or not. So these are other ways to unlock how to make the deferred sales trust an investment and not just an expense. And that's what Jake and also Jake Carpenter, by the way, is also a financial advisor up in the state of Washington. And Pierce is a real estate agent. But these are the reasons why, and Jake Miller, of course, a financial advisor, why you find this investment in the deferred sales trust for this about 2% fees to unlock these ways to make this thing a home run, right? Not an investment and not just an expense. Great question, Marty. Let's go ahead and also open it up to anybody else that might have a question. You can unmute yourself. You can also put the question in the chat. I'll encourage a few people here. We have Gary, we have Irina, we have Maria, we have Sylvia, we have Eleanor. If you have any questions at all, now is a perfect time to unmute yourself or put it into the chat so we can answer that for you. Is there any questions today? And if not, that's okay too. It's no worries. We are winding down anyways. We've covered a lot. Hopefully you've had a chance to digest the majority of that. And that being said, I think we're ready to wrap it up if everyone's ready to go. Pierce York, if people want to find you, what's the best place for them to find you?
Yeah, you can find me at kingdomluxuryrealty.com or on my YouTube channel, living in Newport Beach, California.
And you can also check him out on the Capital Gains Tax Solutions podcast, where he is co-hosting and bringing on amazing guests and doing a great job on that too. Jake Carpenter, if people want to get in touch with you, where's the best place for them to find you?
Carpenter Capital. You can call and schedule an appointment with Sarah at 509-591-9900, 509-591-9900.
Excellent. The Jake Miller, if people want to find you, where can they find you?
strategictaxsolutions.com, as well as 1-800-773-1848.
Excellent. Hey, everybody. If you want to check me out or find me or connect with me, you can go to capitalgainstaxsolutions.com. I'm also on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. You can search my name, Brett Swartz. And then check out the new book coming out. It's called Building a Tax Deferred. Actually, we did change the name, everybody. Okay. We will reveal that next week, the new name, but it's going to be the same cover. It's going to be the same people inside of the book, including Jake Miller, including Kevin Harrington from Shark Tank. Pretty cool. I got a couple chapters as well. But the book is like, we're like literally like this time for real. Like it's like so close to be on the press and available on Amazon. Okay. So capitalgainstaxsolutions.com. We'll have more to go on the book for the release. And then you can also schedule a one-on-one consultation with myself or a team member if you qualify, which means $1 million net proceeds, $1 million gain by going to capitalgainstaxsolutions.com. Thanks so much for watching this. Please give it like a thumbs up, just a thumbs up. That'd be great, right? That'd be amazing. And if you want to subscribe to the YouTube channel to be extra fancy, like that'd be awesome too. Otherwise, we will see you on the next one. Everyone have a great rest of your weekend. Bye now.
Bye-bye.